Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's USIP webinar, Nonviolent Conflict in a Digital World, which will be a conversation with Mary Joyce, Executive Director of the Meta-Activism Project, and Stephanie Rudat, who is a social entrepreneur and co-founder of the Alliance for Youth Movements. Those of you know me from class. This is Darren. Good to see or hear all of you online. And it is my pleasure to say that we've got two excellent presenters with us today for today's class, Mary Joyce and Stephanie Rudat. So I'll go ahead and introduce them. So first, we have Mary Joyce. And Mary Joyce is an international expert in the field of digital activism. She is the editor of the book Digital Activism Decoded, which was published earlier this year. She was also new media operations manager for President Obama's national campaign. She is the founder of two nonprofit projects dedicated to improving activists' understanding of technology. First was digiactive.org, which published best practices in digital activism. And the second is the Meta-Activism Project, which seeks to increase rigor in the study of digital activism. The Meta-Activism Project, which you can visit at metaactivism.org, is currently undertaking the first research effort to collect and analyze a comprehensive set of over 1,000 digital activism case studies from around the world. So welcome, Mary. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks. Great to be here.
And our other presenter is Stephanie Rudat. Stephanie is a principled, centered, and innovative social entrepreneur recognized in the digital technology realm as an expert in the application, integration, development, and global use of connective technologies. Stephanie co-founded Alliance for Youth Movements, a nonprofit organization aiming to positively empower people to effect nonviolent change in the world by creating and promoting the use of technological tools that advance freedom, human rights, democracy, and civil society development all over the world. Additionally, Stephanie has spoken at, organized, and facilitated convenings internationally to shift paradigms on how digital tools can improve education, excel business development, generate civic engagement, and expand causes. She is committed to empowering people by simply exposing them to the ways digital action affects the world and how to enroll, educate, and empower others to do the same. She has been acknowledged as one of Huffington Post's 11 Twitter activists you should be following and has since become a member of their blogging community. Welcome and thank you for being with us today, Stephanie.
Thank you.
So I thought I'd kick us off with a basic yet somewhat complex question, and that is, what is digital activism? So Mary, you've written, researched, and presented on this topic, so let's begin with you. What is your definition of digital activism?
Well, I would say that it is the use of digital technology within activism, or in this case, we could talk about digital technology within nonviolent conflict. So that means the use of tools like mobile phones and computers and applications like Facebook, email, and SMS by groups and individuals to bring about social, economic, or political change within a society. So activism and nonviolent conflict are old practices, and digital technology is, of course, a new tool. So the question for me is whether and how digital technology changes these practices and how these tools can be used more effectively.
Great. Stephanie, do you have a similar definition, or do you see digital activism as something different, or is there something you want to add to this definition?
I definitely agree with Mary, and I would say that activism is really even more broad. It's not necessarily, in my opinion, just about focusing on social, political, or economic, environmental change. I think that it's very simple when people take a stand and are taking action to change anything is a form of activism, and her digital tool application is perfectly described, in my opinion.
Great. Now, just out of curiosity, how did did both of you actually get into this field? I mean, I feel like it's relatively new, so I'm interested how you first, how you kind of establish yourself as experts in this field. Stephanie, how did you get your start?
Thanks for asking. I'm actually thinking of how I was inspired, which takes me to the very first person that I learned of using these different tools we'll discuss to affect change in their world, who is Oscar Morales, the founder of the Million Voices Foundation and the internationally known No Más FARC movement, which took place 2.5 years ago. He is a Colombian friend of mine who used Facebook to help mobilize 12 million people in 190 cities all on the same day to protest FARC peacefully. And at that time, FARC was not the most popular social networking tool in Colombia, but he chose to use it because he liked the platform. It was easy for him to reach other people around the world. That was his primary tool. He did many other forms of marketing and used other tools. It was not until I was watching BBC caught coverage and a friend of mine who used to work at the State Department reached out to him, and at that point we decided that we would start to find other people to see how they were using these tools beyond socializing to affect change in their world. At that point, I literally dropped everything that I was doing and spent the following 4 months, 20 hours a day easily, identifying people all around the world using these tools. So it was all spurred from Oscar Morales' movement.
Great, thanks. Mary, what about you? How did you get started in this field?
Well, I actually became interested in political nonviolent activism first, and then started thinking about what could be done to make, this kind of grassroots activism, particularly in developing countries, make it more effective. And so I was in Morocco in, I guess it was, 2004, 2005, doing a Fulbright research project on democratization. And I was interviewing a lot of grassroots activists. I said, this is amazing what they're doing. This is how, democracy or accountability will actually come, is through these activists. But, what can I do? I'm not Moroccan. I'm an outsider. What role could I have? And this was during the time when blogging was becoming really popular, and people were first hearing, I was first hearing about wikis and social bookmarking, which has somehow become less popular since then. And I went to a Global Voices conference. I think it might have even been the first one, and this is a global blogging organization. And the two pieces came together. You have these activists that are passionate and very connected to societies, but they almost totally lack any kind of financial resources or access to traditional media. And then you have all these new tools that were blossoming that are free or low cost and that allow people to connect one another. And I said, I think I see a connection here that could be fruitful. And so I just kept on digging into it, and it's continued to be fruitful and interesting since then.
Great. So, I get the sense that digital activism is still a relatively new form of activism, or still considered a relatively new form of activism. I could be wrong on that. But given that, it seems like the field is changing on a daily basis. Both of you mentioned different tools that you were exposed to that first got you interested in this, Facebook and social bookmarking. But they're constantly changing on a daily basis. New tools, new platforms, new strategies are developed every day. So, Stephanie, since you've been working with several movements around the world in this field, what do you see as being some of the newer, more emerging trends in digital activism?
That is truly changing moment by moment, and I believe that is triggered by the integration of the different tools and the collaborative efforts that these tools allow for. We're seeing increased opportunities in microfunding. SMS technology is being used in different ways every day, not just to spread a message, but to track activity. And we are more and more mobile phone applications and tools are being used for measuring impact. We're seeing different things for organizing flash mobs, for fundraising. There is a ton going on in the mobile phone category. But, you know, technology, in my opinion, is synonymous with transparency. And with that, you know, what is the ultimate creation of all of this, we're seeing less people being competitive, less people that are trying to do things that are ineffective, because we're seeing it right away, and we're seeing more and more of an ability for everyone to use these tools and not just be limited to different parts of the world. While in the United States, for example, we have a plethora more options to communicate than maybe like one of my groups in Cambodia that were doing human trafficking. They are still able to access some of the information to try to learn what will work for them. So, you know, there really isn't one answer of what is emerging as per se, but I would say that given one thing, mobile technology is really shifting tremendously and will be probably forever.
Would you say that mobile technology, cell phones, or mobile broadband is maybe one of the most widely used digital tools around the world today?
Yes. There isn't an organization that is within my network that does not have some sort of tool being used, even domestically, that is not used on a mobile phone. There's some sort of resource that they're using via mobile phone.
Great, thanks. Mary, what do you think? What do you see as some of the emerging trends in this field? And I also want to invite our participants too, if they have any of their own thoughts to add to this conversation. Please text it in or let us know that you have a comment by raising your hand. But Mary, what say you?
Well, I just did a quick analysis of this data set, which has 1,000. Now it has 1,040 cases. It'll probably be a little smaller when we remove the duplicates. But you're quite right, Darren, that this is a new form of activism. The earliest case that we have is from 1982, and the most recent are obviously from 2010. And just breaking it down by 5-year increments, there are 6 cases from 1990 to 1995, 24 cases from 95 to 2000, 59 cases from 2000 to 2005, and from 2005 to 2010, we have 918.
Wow.
So that means that, you know, I guess that's probably about 80 to 90% of our data set is from the last 5 years. So it's just exploding. And it's going to be interesting to see, you know, what that trend is and when it plateaus off. But it seems like it's not going to do that anytime soon. And also what Stephanie was saying about, you know, people from lots of different countries being able to participate. All 5 cases that we have from 1980 to 1990 are from the U.S., and they're basically bulletin board systems. And then from 2010, we had 220 cases, and those are from 80 countries in just 1 year, and a variety of different tools. So I would also add that because the bar to entry is now lower for activism, because you can basically start a blog or Facebook group if you're aware of it and if you have access to the internet, so you have a lot of activists that have less expertise and less probably strategic training and understanding than previously. So I think percentage-wise, we're going to see fewer, quote-unquote successful cases of activism, but that overall this experimentation is going to lead us to finding new ways to use these technologies for activism.
Well, I'm curious, Mary, how have you gone about gathering the case studies for this database, and what criteria do you use to determine whether or not something is a case of digital activism?
Right. So, I mean, we basically used the definition of activism that I gave you, which is people, groups or individuals trying to make social, economic, or political change. And we also added something about increasing dialogue, because in a lot of countries, just talking about a certain issue like gay rights without even demanding a certain outcome changes political realities. And we collected them basically from people that had already written about them. So we looked, a lot of them are from Global Voices because they write about blog activism around the world, and they have done for, I think, about 5 years. We also looked through a wide range of academic literature, although there isn't really that much in it yet. Most of it is in Europe. And then different organizations that are writing about this. I mean, Alliance for Youth Movements is represented, and also different trainers like Tactical Technology Collective. They do case studies. We collected those. So basically, any sources that we could find, I would say 90% of them are from the internet rather than from books or peer-reviewed journals. But that's just where the literature is at this point.
Okay. Well, sticking on the topic of case studies and examples, I'm wondering, Stephanie, if maybe you could provide us with what you think in the last 3 years has been, a good example of a successful use of digital tools in a nonviolent movement.
Wow. I believe that there are countless. Just among the Alliance for Youth Movements delegates, all of which I'm responsible for choosing and communicating with, and has now grown into my network, there are just hundreds of examples. Mary made a very good point that the ability for anyone to maybe start a movement or blog or launch a cause is easier and easier with access to different forms of technology. So it's not necessarily easy to find the flower among the weeds.
Mm.
At the same time, if people like Mary and I aren't digging through to find the little success stories, we're not able to then share what worked for someone with others to either replicate that action or have it integrate into other actions. So it is a process of really sifting through. Very, very easily we can all look at what the earthquake in Haiti and the State Department working with Mobile Accord launching the SMS text fundraising campaign with Red Cross, and going, oh wow, this really hadn't been done before. It had. People were using mobile text fundraising for quite some time, and it was a great way to bring it to the forefront of the general population's mind. At the same time, SMS was helping survivors connect, aggregate communication data with survivors that were under rubble. They were able to send messages out to anyone that had cell reception at that point, which led to finding and saving many people there. We're seeing more and more flash mobs taking place, especially in the past few weeks in Egypt, where SIM card exchange is incredibly prevalent in order to deflect being identified by the regime as to where people are or what they're communicating. We will train people on how to use SIM card exchange. They go to prison there, or they're incarcerated if they aggregate in groups of 5 people or more. Well, they've been using the SIM card exchange and using SMS technology to communicate with one another and organize very quick flash mobs. And whether there's a lot of debate there on whether that's really nonviolent organizing because of what they're subjecting themselves to, but it is a recent case of how people are physically aggregating using that very simple tool.
Well,
and the list goes on and on.
What is a flash mob? Maybe unpack that for us a little bit more, and also explain a little bit more about SIM card exchange and how that works.
Okay. So a flash mob, it has existed in many different forms. One of the most popular was on an Oprah Winfrey show not too long ago, maybe a couple of seasons ago. A flash mob was organized in which a very quick message went out using different platforms. In that case, they had done an email blast. There was an SMS blast. There was an announcement using radio. There was, really all different kind of traditional and non-traditional forms of communicating with people around the world to say, hey, if you want to get together to acknowledge it was a cause of some sort, come to Chicago, we're going to film it on Oprah. And in that time, they got a bunch of people together and they had systematically broken them into groups and quickly trained them on physical movement so that they could send a message. It happened to be a dance. That has now been done in front of the Walmart headquarters on the East Coast. That has been done in Egypt for everyone at the exact same time to flip a sign over and take a photo to show a message. That was used in the Capitol when Genocide Intervention Network, Save Our Fur Coalition, and many others demonstrated for policy change earlier this year. It is against the rules to show signs in the Capitol. So what they decided to do was all be in there and send a quick SMS message to say, to begin the 10-second countdown. And some people did hold up signs. Other people had written on one side of their shirt. And in sync, they all did their physical movement, put it on film, took a couple of pictures, and that went viral, at least within their network, within an hour. So that's some different ways people smart mob. SIM card exchange is when people have different SIM cards for their cell phone that it identifies a user versus a phone, and you are able to be tracked using one SIM card versus another because of who your service provider is. People will use one SIM card to communicate with their family and 4 or 5 other SIM cards to communicate over business, banking, organizing for political action or social change, or to give someone a forewarning about police coming. And they do that so that they are less trackable. To be honest, I use it all the time. I am on the road. I haven't been in one place longer than 6 days in over a year. And because I'm not necessarily wanted or liked by some people in the world based on where I go, like armed conflict areas, I will I have probably 25 different SIM cards, and I code them all so that I know exactly what I need to use them for. And some of them are strictly limited on, okay, this SIM card only works in Latin America, this SIM card will only work in Norway, to, okay, I don't necessarily know who owns the cell companies here, or I do know and I don't trust them. So I don't want to say where I'm going to be over the phone and via SMS. I'm going to switch that out between messages.
Fascinating, fascinating. Mary, what about you and your research and in gathering all these case studies? What's maybe 1 or 2 examples of what you would determine to be a successful use of digital tools in activism, nonviolent activism?
Well, I think one of the questions, at least the research that we're doing, is, what is success? Obviously, you have one way to measure it is, okay, this activist or these group of activists wants to overthrow a regime, and they're successful if they do, which is such a high bar, you know? Especially in nonviolent conflict, you see that kind of goal frequently, you know, that, you know, regime change. So for something, for example, in Iran, you have this huge, you know, the huge protests. You have hundreds of thousands of people on the street. You had basically the regime losing legitimacy, if any remains, in the eyes of the entire world through citizens sharing media, most obviously, you know, the murder of Neda Agha Sultan. And yet, of course, the current regime is still in power. So was that a failure? You know, and so by one, like, strict sense, you could say, well, yes, that was a failure because the regime is still in power. But, you know, there were so many things that were accomplished in terms of, you know, reducing the legitimacy of the regime, having people see that they are not alone in opposing the regime. I mean, probably someone who knows more about nonviolent conflict analysis could say, okay, there were huge successes here. So I think maybe that's just apologism for, you know, the fact that a lot of digital activism, you know, there's a successful flash mob and then what happens? Nothing, which is the kind of slacktivism argument. But I think let's wait another few years and see if any of these, you know, new discussions, new protests actually end up achieving some of the goals of the activists, because it's still also quite new.
Right. Well, you make very good points on what is success, and can you say because there were 12 million people counted for that demonstrated against FARC in 190 cities around the world, well, we didn't see, were they successful? We didn't see, you know, FARC isn't wiped out. They're still the oldest terrorist organization in the world. But there was significant fallout seen by leadership stepping down, countless kidnappees being freed. And so, no, FARC wasn't wiped out. But guess what? There were a lot more people that learned exactly what FARC is out of that. So the ability for people to be exposed to what's happening in the world based on technology alone, because we're bringing so many more things to the surface, is really success in my book. But I believe that there actually are a lot of different things that we can see success for using these tools, just in successfully connecting to organizations or pushing for the collaboration of organizations using the tools. Genocide Intervention Network and Save Our Fur Coalition just officially announced their collaboration at the beginning of the week. You know, them doing so is made possible because they were both originally started trying to do the same thing, but now they're able to come together, be more effective, and use the different forms of technology that each different group is more savvy with to come together and be more successful. But a successful fundraising campaign is a great sign of activism. A petition that is actually effective in changing a political policy or influencing a vote is success. So I think that these maybe smaller wins are happening all the time. It's just that we're not seeing how the uprising / the green revolution has been a specific success, except for exposure or, you know, so on and so forth. We haven't seen like a takeover of the IRI.
Right, right. Well, you know, I think that you both have been raising some good points, and I think some of it is leading to maybe the flip side of digital activism. And, you know, Mary, you mentioned this issue of slacktivism. And Malcolm Gladwell, you know, the best-selling author of The Tipping Point and other books, he recently wrote an article in the New York Times Magazine that was titled "The Revolution Will Not Be Tweeted." And it got a lot of coverage, a lot of responses to it. In it, he argued that, quote, "the instruments of social media are well suited to making the existing social order more efficient. they are not a natural enemy of the status quo. And I think this statement contradicts some of the ideas around digital activism, more specifically social media as being an effective tool of resistance or liberation or even transparency for that matter. So I'm wondering, Mary, what are your thoughts on the analysis that Gladwell put forward in this statement and in his article?
Well, I mean, he has some interesting points about strong and weak ties, but I think he constructs an argument such that he will win it. You know, he references the least effective forms of digital activism, which is basically, you know, something like joining a Facebook and never doing anything again. And then he references one of the most famous and hallowed instances of quote-unquote analog activism, which is the American Civil Rights Movement. And then he continues on from there. Whereas really, there are so many, everything is a continuum. You know, there's strong and weak ties in analog activism and in digital activism, right? And, you know, would the tactics of the Civil Rights Movement, you know, even make sense today? So there's actually, I have a post on Meta-Activism.org that actually puts together a lot of different arguments. But I think he wanted to write an essay that made a bold and kind of a naysaying argument, and I think he constructed it in a way that was rather one-sided in order to be able to make that dramatic statement. But there were certainly interesting ideas in there.
Stephanie, what are your thoughts on that article, that argument?
I found it completely irresponsible, a reflection of irresponsible journalism, to be frank. I have outlined countless points that he is boldly wrong. If just in, you know, he provoked debate. That's fantastic. It's healthy. Got a lot of people talking. Some of my very favorite people in the world published responses that are very colorful. But the reality is he went and he specifically mentioned activists and convenings and situations that I work directly with those organizers, whether it's Natalia Moriari of Think Moldova, in the quote-unquote Twitter revolution of Moldova. A lot of the things that he claims and were actually said and are recorded and are at Alliance of Youth Movement Summit in Mexico City. Most of the things that he referred to are the work of my delegates. And they're not, you know, they never said it was a Twitter revolution. At many different points they said, hey, we had 34 Twitter followers. It was the fact that there are about 200 users. There were about 200 users of Twitter at the time in Moldova. It was the fact that the hashtag went viral outside of the area and led to 13,000 people showing up for that demonstration. It was the press that gave the title Twitter Revolution. It wasn't them staking that claim. So he went in and he criticized what was the beginning of a phenomenon, and what Natalia was successful in doing, drawing attention, motivating people, getting people to take action. It just, the exposure and ability to then engage people in what they're facing politically and enrolling them to have a larger conversation was the success. It wasn't necessarily their success of changing over the political leadership. So his way of going about it could have been more responsibly conveyed if he was actually stating facts, but he wasn't. So there are a lot of different ways to respond if he was actually referring to truth. You know, how these tools have been used is in exposing more people. We they're not going to be able to change anything about society if we're not introducing people to different ways of thinking. And technology is allowing for that. That is a fact. So how people are successful in having a revolution is yet to be seen.
Great, thanks. We have a question from one of our participants, Dominic Valentino. Please introduce yourself, Dominic, and go ahead with your question and comment for our presenters.
Sure, thank you, Darren. Mary and Stephanie, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you for this webinar and for your thoughts. Just to comment on the Gladwell article, one aspect that I think that Gladwell overlooks is the fact that everybody in society can play an important role in a civil resistance movement and doesn't necessarily need to be at the forefront making dramatic sacrifices and getting arrested, whether that's a role in fundraising, coordination, planning or promotion, even preparing meals or hosting meetings. All these things are very important, and I think that's one thing that Gladwell overlooked. But anyways, on to my question. And the question is on the role of smartphones, and you talked a lot about the role of cell phones already in digital activism. But already in the U.S., 20% of phones are smart, and many experts are predicting a growing trend that within, say, 5 years or whenever, that most cell phones, if not all, will be smart. And I'm just wondering, technology certainly improved the communication and the transparency of information in general, but also with activists. And with the role of the smartphones in the upcoming years, and that GPS, an activist's location can be pinpointed using GPS, how is the role of autonomy going to play for the activists being exposed, or do you see this as an issue or not? I'm just curious.
I know I do. It's right now. If you look at Foursquare, for example, you can make. There are many different ways a cause can make that useful. You can measure how many times someone has actually shown up to a place that they were going to volunteer. Right? There's transparency. You can help give awards for people that go to that place and volunteer 50 times, however it may be, and then that goes into the news feed. More and more people hear about it, find out about the cause, and go forward. Versus, which is a very fluffy example, but useful example of how geotagging, all of these types of ways people can legitimize physical activity. But you're right, you're exposing at times people's whereabouts at a time or in a location that it's not safe. So it is equally important to be able to show people how to turn that tool off on their phone or be able to keep it active for emergency purposes only, which is a common set of login tools that I do every time I return on my phone upon landing in a different part of the world. I decide, do I want to be found or not? And that's just part of the education and keeping people informed on how these tools can be used, but how they can also expose you.
Mary, what are your thoughts on this issue of smartphones and the capacity it gives us to find this nearest Starbucks, but also be tracked by people we don't want to track us?
Well, it's definitely true. I mean, and Stephanie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think even with an SMS, basic SMS, non-smartphone, that you can still be located using triangulation from the cell phone towers that are relaying your call. So that's
right.
Not,
you can, as long as there are the satellites for it. In parts of Africa, for example, you can send an SMS. It will take, in Cuba, for example, right now, it's taking sometimes up to 3 days for one text message to transmit, at which point someone's physical location is different.
Right. But I think,
But here in North America, it's different.
General, conclusion, which is it's going to bring, new possibilities and it's going to bring new risks. I think, yes, both are true. And I think we probably actually have a better idea of the risks than the possibilities, because I think the possibilities are going to come from tactical innovation and uses of applications that we haven't even really thought of yet, like, the example we've been referring to this entire time, using the Facebook for organizing an international protest rally about a terrorist group in, South America. I mean, I doubt Mark Zuckerberg would have thought of that as a possible use, and I doubt, the creators of Foursquare are going to imagine the way activists are going to use them. But in terms of, surveillance of different kinds, I think basically it's going to be fair for activists to assume, particularly in repressive regimes that have shown themselves to be technologically sophisticated, that they don't have privacy. So any SMS they send, anything they post on their Facebook profile, to a lesser extent email, but even email is not super safe, that they're going to be seen. Now, this is something that they're going to have to, learn to be smarter about in terms of keeping themselves safe, but also there's going to be a lot of activism that doesn't threaten the regime, and there's going to be a lot of activism in non-repressive regimes where that's not going to be an issue.
Well, you actually just mentioned something, Mary, that I wanted to touch on, which is, the creators of these very popular platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Foursquare, YouTube. I would argue that they didn't necessarily invent these to be used as tools of activism or in a nonviolent struggle. So I'm wondering, are you aware of any online platforms or digital tools that were designed specifically for activists engaged in, struggles of all types, but particularly nonviolent struggles? And if so, what makes those tools different from Facebook or Twitter to make them more applicable to activists?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is actually something called Crowd Voice, which is created, and I think it's just crowdvoice.org or crowdvoice.com, and it was created by a group of activists in the Middle East called Mideast Youth that Stephanie probably has heard of. And basically it's an alternative, work with them, yeah, it's an alternative collaborative media platform. So, on something like Twitter, you can broadcast, but it's an individual broadcast, individual feed that people can follow. And what CrowdVoice does is it allows you to create a page on a topic or cause that's important to the activist and group, and then you can aggregate information. You can add links, you can add video. So it's basically a way for a movement to keep themselves informed. And this is particularly useful if it's, say, no one in your country is talking about your cause. And you have to rely on, bloggers, you have to rely on international media, or the media in your country is biased. So this allows activists to collaboratively keep themselves informed about their issues, which I think is very cool. And of course, as Esra Al-Shafai is the founder of this organization, I was saying, do you want this to be just for activists? People could be using this to create fan pages about Twilight Saga, and if it was, you'd probably have a bigger audience who might learn about it more easily. But for now, obviously, she's just keeping it activist content. But basically, I mean, the commercial platforms that are used for activism are used for activism because they have such a broad utility. It's you can post any picture, say anything, connect to anyone, and so the tools that are probably least useful for activism are the ones that are very limited in their functionality. But I don't know. I guess you could probably even use an accounting software for activism if you wanted to. So.
Stephanie, what are your thoughts? Are there any new tools that you're aware of that are specifically designed for activists?
There is the tools that Ken Banks at Kajawa, pardon me, I'm choking, is continually developing, are in response to need and in the world, not in the cause world, right? Frontline SMS, Frontline Medic SMS are amazing tools that different organizations are using political governments, all different people are using his tool for different uses, and he's learning from those users, and that's helping him continue to innovate. But those are, SMS technology for medical response, tracking people. We use them a lot at Abolish Slavery. I know Patrick Meyer works with Ken a lot. It's, that's great. I think that what's really beautiful is when these tools are used and the users are innovating on how they can continue to develop. That's, when Twitter was being designed, Jack Dorsey had the concept in his mind when he was 13 or 14 years old. As it came forward, he's the first person that says, wow, I had no idea that people would be able to do X, Y, or Z in the world to affect some sort of positive change using this tool. But I'm thrilled to learn how they're doing that. It helps us to continue to develop. That is no different than with Facebook or how some of the applications like Causes on Facebook are continually innovating. We're seeing that the people that really want to affect change are the most creative. They're acting in response to need, and that is helping all of these tools become more and more refined, and there be larger openings for people to create more, so that people in the for-profit and nonprofit sectors of business or existence can all benefit.
Great. We have a comment here from one of our participants, Vala, and he writes, digital technology and digital tactics are a double-edged sword. They can cut both ways. But except for the speed of delivery, the message remains the same as in traditional campaigns. Put differently, the digital campaign appears to be a classic case of the old wine in a new bottle. So any responses to that? Mary, begin with you.
Well, there is a chapter in the book called The Double-Edged Sword of Digital Tactics, so I clearly won't argue with him on that. The old wine in a new bottle, I would actually strongly disagree with, because these technologies have a very different infrastructure that implies a very different way in which people can communicate with one another. And basically, it's the difference between broadcast and the network. And Yochai Benkler, in his book, The Wealth of Networks, which is long and dense, but probably the best thing that's been written on this topic, and it's not even written on this topic in its entirety, explains how in the pre-digital era, you had one-to-many communication being extremely expensive because you had to buy a printing press, or you had to buy a television station, or you had to buy a radio transmitter, right, if you wanted to reach a large amount of people. And it wasn't impossible to reach large amounts of people in other ways, but it was a lot more difficult. It took a lot more time, a lot more organizing. Whereas now with the network, potentially you can post a YouTube video from Iran, and 8 hours later it's on CNN, and so we're still seeing the mainstream media using things, but they're picking things up because people are already aware of them. So and you're also seeing people being able to communicate with each other without the gateway. So you're not just sharing your opinion and the letters to the editor page in the newspaper where, the editor can basically say, I don't want to hear that opinion. You have blogs, you have Facebook, you have Twitter, and it's different than previous forms of person-to-person communication like the landline phone and the fax machine, because those were basically, one-to-one or one-to-a-few, and there was limited number of people that had them, particularly a fax. So it actually is, the mechanics are actually quite different than previous forms of communication. And I would say that they favor the communication capacity of the individual. And they're less reliant on resources in terms of ability to communicate.
But isn't that what I feel Bala might mean by the new bottle. So there are new technologies that allow the individual to communicate to one or two or many or thousands of people in a new way. So the technology is new, but are the messages the same, or are the messages changing given these new tools?
Are the causes changing? I guess, yeah, the causes probably are not different than they would have been in the absence of technology. I mean, you still see human rights, you still see the environment, you still see different, political candidates facing off against each other. Yeah, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you meant it's the same old activism, it's just happening with a mobile phone instead of with a newspaper. But so yeah, sorry for misinterpreting your comment.
Well, I may be misinterpreting it as well. But I mean, Stephanie, what do you think about this concept of old wine in a new bottle? I mean, how do you interpret that? And
we're dealing with a hybrid of grapes. I mean, this is, and we will continue to. Mary mentions fax machines. Look, these are all tools of technology. Remember, your standard telephone is technology. So look at the involvement. And no, these are hybrids of one another. There are many people taking high-risk actions in a way to respond to repressive environments. The very act of using many of these tools is a form of resistance itself. It's undermining authorities. It is empowering people to do more, and it's one step at a time. There are different parts of the world, people can use these tools in reaction and have bold impact very quickly, and other times it takes a while by using many different tools. The reality is that this is digital resistance. These are being used for different forms of or methods of advocacy, and it is a great way for like-minded people or those that are not like-minded to be able to exchange information and and take actions as appropriate or well-suited for them. And that is a way that is continually progressing. I can't wait to see what different tools we have at our fingertips in 5 more years, let alone in 3 months, and how people are using them.
Well, actually, that's well. Let me give a follow-up question from Bala. He writes, is there any empirical evidence to support the claim of the optimists that digital political campaigns have, quote, increased mutual understanding between advocates and their opponents? As an eternal optimist and a staunch believer in nonviolence, I hope and pray this claim becomes true for all nonviolent campaigns. But I guess, the main question is there empirical evidence that either of you can point to beyond anecdotal information to say, look at how these tools have increased mutual understanding between advocates and their opponents?
I would say there isn't anything empirical, but the anecdotal evidence is not particularly positive. I think there's a lot more voices, there's a lot more talking, but in terms of listening, there was, at least in the U.S., there was a study that was empirical that I want to say, I don't know if Cass Sunstein referred to it or if he actually did the research, but it basically raised the issue of echo chambers, which is that bloggers on the right were linking to bloggers on the right, and bloggers on the left were linking to bloggers on the left. And when there was cross-linking, a lot of it was, look at this stupid idea. So that's more of a pessimistic notion, but I don't think there's enough to support the optimist position.
I mean, in Sri Lanka, I can give empirical evidence for you. 2 organizations that I had identified representatives to attend Alliance of Youth Movements Summit in 2008, our launch. They were both working to create one was more health response, but both are working to create a healthier living environment for Sri Lankans. End of story. But because of their political views, they didn't just not want to work together. They hated one another because of the way that one another's viewpoints had been propaganda. By the time they had heard of one another from a mutual friend trying to connect me with both of them, using email, there's your technology, one, Prabhu, ends up doing a little bit of homework on the other, Prashan, and sees, hey, he's not so bad after all, and goes online and starts reading some things that Prashan had been writing about, and said, oh, wow, this isn't how I thought his organization operated. And by the time they came to New York for our summit, just by reading one another's blogs, finally reaching out to one another, now, almost 2 years later, they're doing work together. They're working on initiatives all the time. So there's evidence on how technology brought two people with completely different perspectives, and they still don't agree politically. But they came together because it was better for their cause and better for the people that they could affect. And they learned about one another using technology. That kind of stuff is happening all the time. We're exposing people to a different way of thinking. It is leading them, we're engaging them. They're becoming more educated. They're enrolling more people. They are becoming more tolerant. And, maybe we're not seeing a merge between, like, the Red Cross and another big organization of its time. I don't think that's what we really need to see. If someone's going to start, an Islamist extremist is going to start reading the Quran on a Kindle or by checking it out of a library and seeing that the way that they've been propagandized by their leadership is different than what the Quran actually says, and it is actually promoting tolerance, and they withdraw themselves from that type of organization, cool. That is one more way of building tolerance.
I actually just wanted to highlight something that was in the original question, which is something that I'm personally interested in, which is, an anecdotal versus empirical, right? So sharing a story about a success or a failure is anecdotal, right? And it's kind of where the field is now, just because there isn't that much empirical evidence. I mean, another way I could say it is like, statistically significant statements based on, comprehensive data sets or representative samples. And I think that until we have that kind of data, we're going to have to answer questions like that with anecdote and personal experience. And so,
right, maybe lead people to the way to say, hey, here is the empirical evidence. Now you see these two organizations working together. Because the empirical evidence, if it in fact exists, would be evidentiary, right? There'd be evidence of the fact. So I think that, people like, you and I, Mary, are delivering a message, but we're basing it on that empirical evidence when responding to a question like that. Am I wrong? Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
I was just saying that, I guess anecdote is a type of evidence, but that in a lot of these questions, you're going to find anecdotes on either side. So, like, I gave the anecdote of the American blogosphere, and then you gave the anecdote on Sri Lanka. And this is just for the people that are participating in this. I think you have or you will find in this field, this is the level of discourse. And it's Patrick Meyer, who we referred to before, he's a scholar, and he works with Ushahidi, which is an SMS platform for activists. He calls it the ping pong match. So basically, for any question, there's enough of the negative and there's enough of the positive that you can just keep going back and forth. And I'm looking forward to the time when we'll be able to say, okay, we've looked at a representative sample of these cases, and we can say that this is a verifiable statement that represents the whole. And so that's what I'm working on in my organization, but I feel like we're getting a little off topic, so sorry for dragging out that.
No, I mean, I think another point that I'd like to raise is to distinguish between nonviolence as an ethic or as a way of life, which may call upon a movement to reach out and try and build a relationship with their adversary, and that can be wonderful and excellent and even strategic. But to also distinguish that from nonviolent conflict or strategic nonviolent action, which is using nonviolent methods and tactics to achieve an objective and a goal, and that goal may not in any way involve reaching out or developing a relationship with your adversary. Instead, digital tools may be used in a nonviolent a strategy using nonviolent tactics as a way to mobilize more people to shift their allegiance to the movement and essentially force your adversary, whether it's a dictator or a corporation or some other type of power structure, to completely dismantle or flee or kind of force it to change. And that change, again, doesn't necessarily need to come from developing a friendship or a relationship between movement and adversary, but to put enough pressure, social, political, economic pressure on your adversary, and digital tools can potentially aid movements in doing that.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
Absolutely.
So another question that I had for both of you is this idea of and this links to Bala's comment about the speed at which information can be shared and people can communicate, and how that may create a disconnect between the speed or lack thereof of a movement, a large social movement. And I'm wondering if you all feel that there is a growing sense of impatience within people who are involved in movements, who expect information and results instantly because they can get that information or communicate that quickly and that rapidly in a digital world using digital tools. But the movement itself doesn't necessarily move at that pace. To reach certain goals, to be successful in certain campaigns, can take months, years, or even over a generation. So, do you all feel that this is something that's happening where particularly young people involved in movements kind of develop an impatience, and they get involved for a week for a movement, but when they don't see an immediate success, they say, well, this is a lost cause or we've lost. Do you think that digital tools add to that level of impatience?
This is Stephanie. We live in an instant gratification society. So there are people definitely that respond in that manner. That's also not organizing, and that's being reactive. It's there. I can't think of many of the successful movements, but I know of that sought immediate results. They all used different forms of technology to and maybe aggregate their own material to create a knowledge base, and then use those tools to organize. You're going to see people, you don't see people just create a Facebook page and have 1,700 friends instantaneously, and they stay on Facebook. Maybe they get on Twitter and they don't take to it immediately and they let that go to later come back to it. Maybe they create a cause or start a petition online and see that people aren't signing it, and so they just give up on pushing that petition. I think that happens everywhere, but if those are the people, I don't necessarily want those types of personalities trying to run a movement. They're not going to be successful at it if they're giving up anyway. You can't just post a video to YouTube and have 600,000 people view it in a couple of hours. it didn't even happen that quickly when the NEDA video went up, and there are a couple of those videos with different angles. It did take a little bit and changing identities for it to get out there. And that didn't necessarily strike the movement. The movement was already happening. It was just a factor in getting more people to pay attention to what was happening. That's really all I have to say about that.
Mary, do you have any thoughts on that?
I agree with what Stephanie said.
Okay. We've got a question from one of our participants, Jake, and he says, with the increased ability of the individual that the individual has to make their voice heard, do you foresee any issues with people being overwhelmed by a sort of digital shouting match? In other words, is it possible that as digital technology becomes more widely available, that people are so overwhelmed by the number of voices that they are unable to focus on a single one or on any single objective? Why don't we begin with you, Mary?
Yes, I think that that's actually already happening, and the key idea here is the long tail, which is not particularly new, but it basically states that you have a few outlets, in this application, that you have a few media outlets online that have a lot of viewers, and then it gradually decreases from there, but at a rapid rate. So you have many, for example, blogs that have, maybe 10 readers a day, millions and millions, and then you maybe have like 10 that have over, 10 million readers a day. And that is a response to the incredible amount of voices, which is that we filter and we decide who we trust to select pieces of news and give it to us. And those are the highly read blogs. For example, Huffington Post. They have writers that are reading different sources, and then they choose of those, whatever hundreds of thousands of stories they come across that day. They say, okay, this is the interesting one, and this is what I'm going to put on the front page. So yes, it's happening, and that's kind of bad in terms of the idea that everyone now has a voice, because people have a voice, but they don't necessarily have attention to their voice. But there's also a sort of a filtering mechanism that's much more democratic, whereby you have people that are filtering through different blogs and are coming across maybe one post in 1 year that blog ever gets, 300 readers on, but it is, highlighted. So yes, and that's been the response so far.
Stephanie, do you have any thoughts on kind of the digital shouting match?
I completely agree. I think it's evident. Evidence is everywhere that we're overwhelmed, and there also goes to, if you build it, they don't come. Just because you post one video out there does not mean that your voice is going to be heard, or build a blog and think people are going to come. Mm-hmm. There are so many people adding to these conversations, and it can often dilute a message. And there is, social responsibility in that, recognizing who is doing well. And I believe Mary's example of Huffington Post is really good, because it does show the power of aggregating material and having more impact, versus one entity constantly email blasting or having one perspective always available.
Great. Yeah, and I also encourage our participants, if you have your own kind of ideas or answers to any of these questions, please feel free to raise your hand, and you can share your own comments. I guess a follow-up question from that is on this idea of if they, how did you put it, Stephanie? Like, if they build it, they won't come, or?
They don't come. Well, if you build it, they don't come. I think that a lot of there's a lot of misunderstanding, and hey, go to Tumblr or flavors.me and create your blog, and because other people maybe see you on there, they're going to follow. You have to draw people to your website. You have to draw people to learn and want to know more, and that is marketing. That is part of sharing. If you don't share, people won't even know about you. They're not going to know that you have a YouTube page. They're not going to know that you are using an alias on Foursquare to spread information on causes. You have to put that out there, and many of the tools can be integrated in order to make it more effective for you to do that. You see different types of campaigns for all different types of things, creating their cause presence, their brand presence on different platforms, and then putting the like button for Facebook on there. Well, now people know on your blog and on your website that you have a Facebook presence. Oh, click here to follow me on Twitter. Another way to be sharing information on you. Those are very common and obvious ways. But if you want to maybe reach to people in Ecuador, you're going to need to use a different form of technology to communicate your message on what you're trying to accomplish in Southern California to those people, because they don't necessarily have the same resources. So you would use the technology that they're more sensitive to and integrate it into your campaign efforts to draw them in. That is an example of building it and fertilizing and watering and tending to the garden that's going to make the blossoms grow.
Yes, good analogy. I definitely, definitely get the sense that oftentimes it's like, oh, I post something on YouTube and it'll grow on its own, but it does require some type of cultivation. So maybe we could unpack that a little bit further. I guess for those of us who are interested in using digital tools in our respective campaigns, once you post something on YouTube or you launch your official website or you start your Twitter feed, what are some ways that you can water that digital plant? Mary, do you have any ideas?
Sure. Well, the first thing that you need to figure out is who you want to read it, and more importantly, who needs to read it and to be aware of that information in order for you to achieve your goal. So, for example, if it's something super local, like something in your school, then you'd want to post it and then, I don't know, email your friends, email the people that you think are, politically active and are interested in that cause, and also think about, what are the networks that you can tap into, right? So if it's something about, racial discrimination, and there is, a Latino Students Union or a Black Students Union, to email them and say this might be of interest to you. And also, and this is just an organizing idea, usually it helps to have relationships with your audience before you ask them to do something for you. But thinking about individuals, if it's really small, and then thinking about networks, and then if you're trying to get more attention, think about that long tail. Think about who above you, who has a little bit more attention than you do and is also interested in your cause and can bring readers to your cause. So you wouldn't email, the Huffington Post, but if there's, a local blogger in your city that is, of your political persuasion or writes about the cause that you're interested in, email that person and say, hi, I'm trying to do this campaign. Say, these are 5 bulleted points that we're trying to get across. Could you help? And, the lower down the food chain a blogger is, the more receptive they're going to be to requests like that, because they themselves are looking to post stories and to get more attention. And then with any luck, the really big blogs are looking at that blogger and they say, oh, well, this is an interesting story. And then it'll get, pushed up the food chain. So yeah, looking who has slightly more attention than me that can share some of that attention, so some of those readers. And then who are the individuals and who are the networks that I can reach out to in order to reach my audience.
I completely agree with you, Marion. The one part of networks, we're tapping on the word network that you just used, is are there other people out there that are trying to achieve the same thing?
Yeah, totally.
You know, that power of collaboration. How have they been successful if we unite in our voice, even if it's not, even if the entirety of our mission is not aligned? If on this point we come together, can we be more effective and gain the attention of a larger audience?
Yeah, and that'll also affect your credibility with a wider audience. So if you are advocating for something and there's already another organization doing the same thing, you know, people are going to look at your message and they say, okay, this person isn't very organized. They're clearly not aware of what else is going on in the field because they're not, you know, they're not connecting, they're not linking to this other organization. So not only will it help you to work together probably in terms of sharing resources and what have you, but it'll also affect the way that your organization is perceived.
Well, I want to go back to an earlier conversation that we were having, and that's the kind of flip side to the coin. And I'm wondering, what are some examples of how repressive regimes have also used these tools and these platforms for their own purposes, to stifle dissent, to track, you know, activists, and to censor information that they don't want their citizens receiving? What, you know, what tools and what strategies are they using? And I guess at the largest global level, who do you think is winning that battle? Stephanie, what do you think?
Well, a perfect example is Hugo Chavez joining the Twitter sphere. If you can't beat them, join them. He made every effort to limit access to Twitter, still tries to filter Venezuelans' ability to access the Internet, let alone cell phone usage. However, in his very loud statements against Twitter, he really condemned the use of it and as a tool, and later joined it, does tweet, and they are also using that to identify people within the country that are tweeting, or people that are a threat to the potential for implementation of democratic process in Venezuela, to build what there is their social media blacklist. That is exactly how they go by. They call it, and they have a blacklist of people that I've proudly earned a little line on, are people that they won't let in their country because of the way that they support activism and push against the repressive government in Venezuela. That is one common example, or easy example, of how they've joined. Or you can look at how people do investigations and create fake profiles on different platforms like Facebook in order to go online and see what people are doing. In Pakistan, one of the organizations that I support is called the Kuti movement. It's a social movement pushing against violent extremism, and we go into universities and talk with different people. We just are storytellers, essentially, helping to open the eyes of people, and we are constantly having to filter through who's friending, who's joined a fan page or a page or group on Facebook, or who's now following me on Twitter that is on the other side, that is a threat to our success. And they're not necessarily part of the Pakistani government, but they are members of a terrorist organization. So, you know, they're using the tools. I don't necessarily know, I can't remember the second part of your question, if we're ahead. The tools are tools. The more people that are exchanging information, and we're educating people, opening the eyes of everyone in the world to things that are going on that do or don't affect them, we're probably a leg up on our adversaries, but I don't know. I don't necessarily want to see them to know, because that might mean that something they're being more successful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So just kind of as a rule of thumb, you can think of repressive regimes as doing three things online to maintain control: blocking, tracking, and joining. So blocking is basically censorship, saying we perceive that there's a threat to people, challenging us online or even having conversations. We're going to try to prevent that from happening. So that means blocking people from speaking, by say blocking, Twitter, blocking a blogging platform, and also blocking people from viewing that new information. So, it's like in Turkey, they blocked YouTube, the entire site, because there was a video criticizing Ataturk. Then tracking is, okay, we can't stop all this communication, or maybe we don't even want to because it has commercial value, but we're going to track what you're doing. So we're going to watch what people are tweeting about us, and we're going to, blacklist them. Or in places like Egypt, we're going to bring them into the police station. We're going to beat them. I mean, it can get quite vicious. Or we're just going to write who's writing emails about democracy. Or who's sending text messages, so there's a range of tracking things, and depending on how repressive and how the capacity of the regime, it can lead to some very dangerous things happening to activists in real life. And then joining is actually, to me, the most interesting, and it's the example of Venezuela. And my favorite example of joining, which is actually pretty terrifying, is that the Iranian government, after the protests, they posted photos of protesters online, and then they tried to crowdsource identification of the protesters by saying, okay, here are the photos online. You who are in the internet, please help us to identify these people, basically, so you can imprison and torture them or what have you. And I think that was probably more for intimidation than actually asking people to participate, but who knows? I guess in terms of who's ahead, I think it started with activists in front, and that there was then a reaction by repressive governments saying, oh crap, if we didn't know this could be used to challenge us in this way, we're going to start filtering, we're going to start censoring, we're going to start tracking. And the thing is now that a lot of governments around the world are getting really good to the extent of even being proactive. So there's some indication that these countries are talking to one another. So you're probably going to see now instances where repressive regimes are proactively putting in technological blocks before their own citizens are becoming digitally active because, say, they're following the lead of China. And so it could potentially go the other way. I think at this point it's kind of a period of pretty dynamic government catch-up on the point of repressive regimes. So yeah, it's a critical time, I would say.
Okay. Well, we have time for one last question, and it comes from one of our participants, Selena. So Selena, please introduce yourself and go ahead with your question and comment.
Hi, I'm Selena Knode. I'm a student at American University. I'm wondering, one of you mentioned the word brand as to do with advocacy. So I was wondering if there's a threat to a movement for creating too much of an advocacy brand that could alienate its base.
Do you want to give an example?
I'm not really sure, because I think the brand, someone mentioned the word brand, and it kind of threw me off.
Yeah, there's a brand. There are and there aren't. So when I use the word brand, your brand in a form of activism, we can look at the anti-genocide movement. There is STAND, a student coalition. There are countless movements. There are countless registered 501c3s, and they do brand themselves to set themselves apart. whether that comes for a fundraising angle, for the way that they message and communicate to earn new supporters, how they qualify for a fellowship as a leader, how they will qualify for a grant. They brand themselves to set themselves apart. There is, it's just part of your design. And as a social entrepreneur, a builder of businesses that I've built and sold or moved on from, none of that, those experiences have helped me in the nonprofit world. And that is, you have to identify and shake out who you are and what your mission is and what you want to be known for and the different ways that you can be multifaceted or not. And that is part of branding yourself. And brands evolve. And you can see that in the way Cheerios may have marketed itself throughout the years, or how in the world of activism, the genocide movement has rebranded themselves throughout the year. In fact, I believe even in their press release, they use the word brand or rebrand as they join as one, as STAND, Saved Our Fur Coalition, and Genocide Intervention Network publicly redefine how they want the public to view them.
Mary, do you have any thoughts?
And, that's not always, in a movement, you're not always working on a brand, but not every movement becomes a cause or a nonprofit organization either.
No, I agree with what Stephanie said. I think that was a good explanation.
Okay, great. Well, do either of you have any concluding remarks as we kind of close out today's webinar?
I guess I would just say that this is very much a field that is being built. And it's a body of knowledge that's being built, and even the terms within it are being defined and redefined. A few years ago it was e-advocacy. Before that it was cyber activism. Now it's digital activism. So expect the definition of this field to change. Expect knowledge about this field to change. Expect the phenomena in it to change. And one of the things that I think is interesting, and hopefully you as well as students and activists, is the ability to define this new area of human endeavor and how we understand it. So that's what's going to keep me going after this call ends.
Right. And I definitely agree. It's exchanges of information like this that refuel me and keep me going to dig out and want to investigate and learn more and more. But all of this is evolving. Technology has been evolving since the very beginning. And as long as we are all in communication with one another, agreeing or disagreeing, but sharing and fostering the communication, reaching out, and leaving the door open for things to evolve and happen that can be used in a multitude of different ways for people to spread their message or exchange information or collect information this is going to be going on forever. We're a student of the world and how it's existing and how people behave. And if, as leaders individually or of groups, we have a responsibility to do our homework. And that doesn't change if you've spent 10,000 hours working on a particular subject matter. In every field, there is constant development. And I'm very excited to watch and see how more and more people are using different tools, technological and more traditional, to affect positive change in all different areas of life and in the world.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mary and Stephanie, for being with us today. We really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your experience and insights with us. And I want to thank all of the participants in the USIP class who took time out of their busy workday to log in. This will obviously be recorded, so all of our other participants will be able to benefit from this conversation. So with that, I'll see the participants in class next Tuesday. And Mary and Stephanie, I'll be in contact with you soon. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Darren.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie.